This piece of silver cast out Adam and Eve. It turned staves into snakes, parted and closed the Red Sea. Ares used it to start the Trojan War, and with it a poor carpenter turned water into wine.
Imagine an object so powerful it could control minds, bend the will of others, and unveil the deepest secrets of the universe. This is not a plot device from a science fiction novel, but instead it's the Apple of Eden, a very mysterious object familiar to many, or at least heard of by many fans of Assassin's Creed. What exactly is the Apple of Eden? How many of them exist? Where are they located currently? Who invented them? These are just a few of the numerous questions that arise when discussing this mysterious piece of Eden. We first saw the Apple of Eden way back in the very first Assassin's Creed, and still to this day, the current Assassin's Creed games also feature this piece of Eden. But there's a lot more than meets the eye. If you're not aware, the Apple of Eden is part of a larger collection known as Pieces of Eden. In fact, there's an insane amount of Pieces of Eden. We've got Shrouds of Eden, Spears of Eden, Swords of Eden, Crystal Balls, Crystal Skulls. The list just goes on and on of the many pieces of Eden within this franchise. In fact, if you'd like to see me make a video explaining these objects, then simply leave a comment below, and do consider subscribing if you enjoy this type of video. Now, this video will include subtitles, as these types of videos do require some level of paying attention, and what better way than subtitles? So just press the CC button somewhere on the screen and you'll be able to access those subtitles. Oh yeah, and I've already made a video explaining the statues under Villa Auditore as well as the sages if you want to check those out too. If you have any other recommendations for these lore style videos, be sure to comment below. So without further ado, this is the Apple of Eden explained. So to first understand an Apple of Eden, we first must go back in time to the beginning, back to the Apple of Eden's origins. Who or what created this mysterious set of objects? The story of the Apple of Eden begins with the advanced civilization known as the ezio, or the first civilization, whose profound knowledge far surpassed anything known to humans who came after them. Among their many creations were the Apples of Eden, artifacts imbued with incredible powers to control minds, manipulate the fabric of reality, and exert influence over the natural and social world. You see, these Apples of Eden are very important to understanding the lore of the Assassin's Creed series. I say this because they pretty much serve as focal points of conflict, power and mystery in almost every Assassin's Creed game. We've seen many of our favourite assassins and protagonists come into contact with or possessed an Apple of Eden at some point. There's Altair, Ezio, Connor, Desmond, Arno and so on. Now just going back to the first civilization real quick. I'm sure we all know the ezio was way ahead of humans in terms of technology and intellect. They knew a lot about things like genetic engineering and the science of quantum physics and whatnot. Now the ezio created these Apples of Eden to control and influence humans at that time, primarily for labour and as a means to maintain order. The way that they achieved this was by modifying their brains to be obedient in the presence of a piece of Eden, and of course an Apple of Eden falls into this category. These apples hold the power to cast illusions, manipulate minds, and even control the will of individuals or groups, making them pretty much invaluable for both domination and guidance. And if that sounds familiar, Assassins versus Templars. I'm sure you've noticed in Assassin's Creed 3 during a modern day mission, we see Desmond use the Apple of Eden to force Warren Vidic to be obedient and ultimately end his own life due to the power of the apple. That's the type of influence this object has. So it's clear to say a lot of power and responsibility will come to light under the possession of an Apple of Eden. Now what's quite interesting about the origins of the Apple of Eden is that Adam and Eve, you know, the first two humans to ever exist on this earth, played a very big role in the downfall of the first civilization, all thanks to the Apple of Eden. So before the Toba catastrophe occurred, which if you don't know is the cataclysmic event that saw the near total extinction of both humanity and the ezio around 75,000 BCE. So Eve sparked a revolt against the ezio by taking the Apple of Eden. What's quite interesting is that she was actually immune to the control of the Apple of Eden because her brain lacked the required neurotransmitters. So what she did was awaken another hybrid, who I'm sure you can guess is Adam. Eve persuaded Adam to interact with the apple, and when he did, it freed his mind, and subsequently they started a rebellion against their creators. You know, the whole Adam and Eve thing in Assassin's Creed is one of the more interesting pieces of lore in this franchise, and it's a shame that Ubisoft has simply just neglected that side of the game, but that's talk for another video. So you're probably wondering how the Apples of Eden fell into the hands of people thousands of years later, like Ezio, Altair, Arno and so on. So remember that Toba catastrophe that I just briefly mentioned? Well, the result of that saw the Apples of Eden and many other pieces of Eden to be scattered across the world. These artifacts, buried, hidden or lost, waited for centuries or even millennia until humans, who are now the dominant species on Earth, stumbled upon them. In fact, this is exactly how the Assassins and Templars were formed. The dual nature of the apples as tools of enlightenment and instruments of domination reflects the ongoing struggle between the Assassins and Templars, two factions with very convoluted and differing views on freedom and order. We know that the Assassins fight to ensure that humanity can forge its own destiny free from the manipulation of the apples, while the Templars seek to use the apples' power to impose a singular vision of peace and order upon the world. Up until now, as I've been making this video in 2024, the apples have become the most identifiable among any of the pieces of Eden, while other pieces have been noted for their potential to cause time paradoxes. If you watch my video on 5 conspiracy theories in this franchise, you know there's a certain piece of Eden focused on time travel, but that's not the topic of this video. Anyway, that's the origins of the Apple of Eden. Now that you know this, let's move on. There is a lot of different apples of Eden. The power that these mysterious objects hold are beyond comprehension for any human. The Apple of Eden holds abilities that have shaped the course of human history within the lore of this franchise. These ancient devices are not just symbols of power, but also tools with a wide range of capabilities. Let's delve into the powers, the abilities, and the uses of the Apple of Eden, breaking them down in a way that's relatively easy to understand. These apples of Eden were capable of displaying images, creating believable illusions, and making thoughts come to life. This made them powerful tools used by many famous leaders throughout history, demonstrating just how powerful they really were. One of the primary abilities of the Apple of Eden is mind control and influence. This means the apple can make people think and act in ways they normally wouldn't. Imagine being able to convince someone to do something without them realizing they're being influenced. The Apple of Eden can make large groups of people follow orders, see things that are not there, or just turn them against each other. This power was often used by those in possession of the apple to control populations or sway the outcome of important events. A great example of mind control being used within the lore of this franchise is during Assassin's Creed 3. In the modern day of that game, we play as Desmond as he attempts to break into an Abstergo facility. Whilst doing this, he uses the apple to mind control and influence Abstergo's soldiers to turn against each other. Another showing of the apple's power and abilities is being able to create incredibly realistic illusions. This isn't just about seeing something that is not there, it's about experiencing it as if it was real. These illusions can be as simple as making an object appear out of nowhere, or as complex as creating entire scenarios or environments that people fully believe they're experiencing. This ability makes the apple an incredibly deceptive tool in the hands of those who knows how to use it. An example of illusion creation with the Apple of Eden occurs in Assassin's Creed 2, where Ezio uses the apple against Rodrigo Borgia during their confrontation to create illusions of himself during the fight, making them appear real and capable of combat. I think the most popular representation of illusions being created with the apple was at the end of Assassin's Creed 1, where we see Al-Mualim use two different powers of the apple at once. He takes control of Altair and also creates illusions of himself to fight Altair. Though less commonly highlighted, the Apple of Eden has shown capabilities for healing and regeneration. Now this doesn't mean it can cure any ailment or bring back people from the dead, but it can accelerate healing processes and, in some cases, rejuvenate the user to some extent. This makes it a pretty valuable tool not only in battle, but also in ensuring the longevity of its user. But whilst healing and regeneration are not the main focus of the Apple like mind control and illusion creation, it's other pieces of Eden such as Shrouds of Eden that primarily focus on healing capabilities. Now this specific ability is not necessarily an actual magical ability or a power, but the apple also serves as a repository of ezio knowledge and technology. It can quote unquote communicate with users, showing them visions of advanced technology and the information needed for its construction. This aspect of the apple has enabled individuals like Leonardo da Vinci to study the apple to an extent to create inventions and several weapons far ahead of their time. Remarkably, the apple can emit energy blasts, similar to those of the Sword of Eden, albeit on a smaller scale. It can manipulate energy to form tangible holographic apparitions, or to project blasts of energy, which have been used defensively in battles or as a mean of attack. King Washington demonstrated that the apple can release energy blasts, though not as powerfully as the Sword of Eden. The apple's illusions can also physically hurt someone, like stunning an enemy with an energy burst upon touch. Even without being directly operated, the apple can still affect people, as seen when it tried to sway Washington with an illusion. There's a specific Apple of Eden that I'll talk more about later in this video that had the unique ability to give objects special powers. For example, there's one instance which is the head of Saint Denis. This could create scary illusions because the apple had charged it with mystical energy. During a Mongol attack on Masyaf, Altair harnessed the apple's power to create lifelike golden projections of assassins to fend off the invaders. In a much darker turn of its powers, the apple has been used to reanimate the dead, as seen when Isidora used Akhenaten's apple. This led to a curse that brought the bodies of deceased pharaohs back to life. highlighting the unpredictable and potentially perilous nature of the apple's powers if used in a malicious intent. Now that's the powers and abilities of the Apples of Eden. There may be more that we don't know about. Maybe in games like Assassin's Creed Red and Hexe we'll see the apple again, but this time potentially harnessing new powers and abilities. Okay, now this part of the video is one that is very interesting. Even during my research for this part, I found out about stuff that I had no clue even existed, and a lot of this is pretty shocking. We've got apples of Eden within the AC universe that are not found but we know exist. We've got apples that are claimed by certain individuals, and even apples of Eden that have been destroyed over the course of humanity in some way, shape or form. Let's start off with all the unclaimed apples of Eden first, the ones that we don't currently know where they're located. So first off, Apple of Eden 1. This apple was first discovered in the Saint Denis Temple in France. It played a pretty important role in creating a sword named the Sword of Suja. I'm sure if you played Assassin's Creed Unity, you know all about that sword. Now during the French Revolution, the protagonist of Assassin's Creed Unity, Arnaud Dorian, secured the apple and handed it over to the assassins over in Cairo. Napoleon later went there to acquire it to rise as France's ruler, but somehow lost it in an unknown way. The fate of the apple after Napoleon came into the hands of a man who I'm surprised even exists in the AC universe, and that is Harry Houdini, who in real life was a very famous escape artist, illusionist and stunt performer. In the Assassin's Creed lore, he managed to use the Apple of Eden in helping with his stunts. Quite a while later after that, the same apple played a massive role in JFK's assassination by creating a quote-unquote phantom on the hill illusion. If you want to know more about how JFK's assassination fits into the Assassin's Creed lore, then check out my conspiracy theories video I made as I go more in depth with that topic. Anyway, after that, this specific apple is just simply a mystery. Nobody knows where it is or if it's even functional. The next unclaimed Apple of Eden that we know of is Apple of Eden 3. This specific Apple of Eden was brought to the New World by the Freemasons. It also fell into George Washington's hands during the American Revolutionary War, but he was troubled by visions that gave him nightmares of some sort of parallel universe, where in that vision, he used the power of the apple to become the King of America. Now because he was afraid of these visions, he simply handed over the apple to Connor Kenway, who later just simply tossed it into the sea. Now you may think that this would be the end of the apple, but surprisingly it managed to be recovered. By the 20th century, Franklin D. Roosevelt had acquired the apple. He collaborated with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin, playing a pretty important role in the lead up to World War II. After that, JFK, whose name appears a few times in relation to different apples of Eden, managed to become the owner of the apple. However, his tenure was cut short when he was of course assassinated, as I'm sure a lot of us know, especially if you know your real life history. After that, the apple managed to find its way into the hands of a defected assassin / Templar named William King Harvey. What he did with the apple is not known, but we do know that after his time with the apple, it managed to fall into the hands of the 36th president of the United States after JFK, being Lyndon B. Johnson, who in the lore of Assassin's Creed was actually a man who aligned himself with the Templars. Now here's where it gets pretty interesting. This same Apple of Eden was used for the Apollo 11 mission and ended up being helpful in finding another Apple of Eden located on the goddamn moon. Who would have thought an Apple of Eden on the moon? It just makes you wonder that the lore of this franchise goes beyond just planet Earth, and after that the apple's whereabouts are just simply unknown. So this Apple of Eden is the one I mentioned previously that was discovered on the moon. After the solar flare in 75,000 BCE, this apple along with many others was simply sent into the sky, but this specific apple landed on the moon. It was then recovered during the Apollo 11 mission that I mentioned previously, and after that the apple is simply unknown. Okay, now this specific Apple of Eden is definitely the most identifiable Apple of Eden in the entire series. So during the Italian Renaissance, Ezio Auditore famously used this Apple of Eden in his battle against the Italian branch of the Templar Order. It's pretty much what we know from the entire Ezio trilogy. So this Apple of Eden initially belonged to Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II during his takeover of Constantinople. Later his son Sem concealed it in the Templar archives in Cyprus. After that it fell into the hands between the Templars and the Assassins. It was eventually seized by Girolamo Savonarola, and then after that is what we know of in the games. Ezio then recovered the apple, using it alongside the Staff of Eden to access the Vatican Vault and communicate with a hologram of Minerva from the first civilization as shown in Assassin's Creed 2. We also saw the apple in use when Monteriggioni was under siege, in which Ezio gave it to Mario to keep safe. Of course after that we know what happens, as shown at the start of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood when Mario was captured and killed by Cesare Borgia, who then took the apple. The apple then managed to get stolen by Rodrigo Borgia, who hid it in St. Peter's Basilica until Ezio retrieved it, using it to defeat Cesare Borgia and his followers. After that, Ezio then hid the apple in a vault under the Church of Santa Maria, where it stayed hidden until Desmond Mars and his team discovered it in 2012. Now when they discovered it, we got presented with that very unfortunate scene in which Desmond was manipulated by Gino into, stabbing Lucy, leading to his coma. The apple was then used by Desmond and his group to enter the Grand Temple and later to confront Abstergo in Rome. Desmond used his powers to make Warren Vidic and other Abstergo soldiers turn their weapons on themselves. After all that unfolded from Assassin's Creed 2 to Assassin's Creed 3, the apple currently is simply held by the modern day assassins. I do get the feeling that we'll see more of this Apple of Eden in Assassin's Creed Infinity that releases later this year. Okay, let's move on to an Apple of Eden that is showcased within the Assassin's Creed 2016 movie, a movie I recommend solely for the purpose if you just enjoy the lore of this franchise. It's an okay movie, it's definitely not the best, but it is worth a watch nonetheless. Anyway, as for Aguilar's Apple of Eden, this apple has some pretty fascinating backstory. In fact, this Apple of Eden was in possession of the first ever human being to possess one, with that being Mohammed XII of Granada, who surrendered it to Tomás de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor and a Templar in 1492, after his son Prince Ahmed was taken hostage. The apple did not exactly remain with de Torquemada for long. In fact, the assassins Aguilar and Maria in the 2016 movie managed to reclaim it. Although Maria managed to lose her life during the conflict retrieving the apple, Aguilar managed to flee with the apple, eventually passing it on to Christopher Columbus, an ally of the assassins. Christopher Columbus carried this Apple of Eden on his voyage to the Americas, where it stayed in his possession until he passed away, after which the apple was entombed with him in Seville Cathedral in Spain. The Templars then located and retrieved the apple in 2016 by accessing the memories of Aguilar through Callum Lynch, but during his presentation to the Templar Council of Elders in London, Callum assassinated Alan Rickon and fled with the apple. If you played the Curse of the Pharaohs DLC in Assassin's Creed Origins, then you know all about this one. So this specific Apple of Eden belonged to the Pharaoh Akhenaten, who discovered it during his rule. He and Queen Nefertiti, believing the apple to be the deity Aten, founded a religion that worshipped this artifact. After their deaths, their son Tutankhamun, who's probably the most famous pharaoh in history, inherited the apple but decided against continuing its worship. Instead, he entrusted it to the care of the high priests of Amun in Thebes. By the 1st century BCE, the apple was under the guardianship of the god's wife of Amun. Unfortunately, she was murdered, and the apple then fell into the hands of her daughter Isidora. In 38 BCE, Isidora wielded the apple to summon ghosts images of past pharaohs to avenge her mother's murder, an act that the people of Thebes call a curse. Bayek then went to Thebes to solve this mystery. He identified Isidora as the source of the curse, eliminated her, and then took the apple. Bayek then gave the apple to Suthek, a relative of Pharaoh Ramses II, for protection. However, Suthek later died under mysterious circumstances. But here's where it gets a bit strange. The body of Suthek was discovered by Bayek himself, but the apple was nowhere to be seen. So if you've read the comic named Assassin's Creed Valhalla Song of Glory, then this specific Apple of Eden might be familiar to you. So this apple was stored in the Temple of Heimdall, located on the Vikenstappen Mountains in Ryafylke, Norway. It was discovered in 870 by Gull, a slave under Kjotve the Cruel and a reincarnation of the Isu Eden. During a confrontation in the temple, Eivor stumbled upon a hidden chamber filled with gold, and an Apple of Eden just there on a pedestal. As Eivor attempted to claim the apple, she was momentarily incapacitated by Gull, who regained her Isu memories upon touching the apple. Despite the temple's imminent collapse, Gull used the apple to paralyze Eivor, revealing her true identity and rejecting her former life as a slave. Now when Gull accidentally dropped the apple, the stasis was just broken, freeing Eivor, and as the temple was crumbling, Eivor saw the apple's potential power, but chose her people's safety over claiming it, and so the apple was left behind with all of its secrets. So the next time you play Assassin's Creed Valhalla and you run into Kjotve the Cruel, just know that he's a character that has deeper lore behind him, and he's not just there for the sake of being evil. You see, that's why I love the lore of this franchise, because characters that you may expect have no meaning at all can actually be pretty influential in other Assassin's Creed forms of media. And yes, the Assassin's Creed Valhalla Song of Glory comics is canon. Okay, so now that I've talked about all the apples of Eden that are currently unknown and apples that we don't exactly know where they are, let's move on to the apples of Eden that we know have been destroyed. So this specific apple of Eden is, in my opinion, the second most recognized after Ezio's apple. It was initially in the possession of Medin Amun from the Order of the Ancients and was ultimately retrieved by Bayek in Assassin's Creed Origins. He used this apple to avenge the mockery of his son Kemu's death, and after this set of events, Bayek simply kept the apple, eventually entrusting it to Apollodorus. However, it briefly fell into Flavius' hands, but Bayek reclaimed it once more and later secured it in the library of Alexandria. Unfortunately, the apple was then later taken by the Templars, who hid the apple in Solomon's temple until 1191, when Al-Mualim sent his assassins to retrieve it. This is where we see Al-Mualim use it to control Masyaf's population. Altair pretty much overthrew Al-Mualim and took the apple and utilized it throughout his life. The next owner of this apple was way later, with Elizabeth I of England, who used the apple to support Protestant beliefs over Catholic ones. After Elizabeth I, the apple actually fell into the hands of Gandhi himself, who used it to gather a large following in India. However, the Templars found out about this and assassinated Gandhi to claim it. By 1960, the Templars used this apple and another in JFK's assassination. Then the apple was ultimately destroyed in the DIA satellite accident. The fourth apple of Eden first appeared in Chinese art from the 10th century, depicted as a golden sphere held by a demon, initially mistaken for a grenade. Nikola Tesla, a renowned inventor from Croatia, was the earliest known human to have this apple. It's believed that he used it to advance his electrical inventions. However, the Templars, seeing Tesla as a threat, discredited him through Thomas Edison and ultimately stole the apple from his laboratory, contributing to Tesla's mental decline. Henry Ford then received the apple, using it to control his factory workers for increased profits, before sending it to Adolf Hitler, right as he rose to power in Germany. In 1943, Adolf Hitler passed the apple to Templar Gero Kramer for use in secretive projects, including one that involved kidnapping Tesla to work on a device called Die Glock. This is something I also talked about in my conspiracy theories video, so I won't go too in depth here. So pretty much by 2017, it's believed that the apple was simply destroyed. So this specific Apple of Eden was one that we saw near the start of Assassin's Creed Syndicate. This Apple of Eden was held in an underground lab by the British Templars and was examined by the scientist Sir David Brewster. When Evie Fry killed Sir David, the apple overloaded and exploded, destroying the lab and everything within it, leaving Evie as the only one to make it out alive. This specific Apple of Eden was one that we saw throughout the story of Assassin's Creed Odyssey's crossover stories expansion. So Cassandra discovered pirates searching for hidden treasure on an island. She joined forces with Herodotus and Barnabas and then embarked on a quest to locate this treasure, which turned out to be another Apple of Eden. After defeating the pirate captain who was strengthened by the apple, Cassandra attempted to claim it. However, the apple interacted with the spear of Leonidas, draining its power, then propelled itself away. Barnabas attempted to retrieve the apple for Cassandra but fell under its spell, leading to a confrontation between the two. Cassandra eventually wrestled the apple from him and shortly thereafter destroyed it. Just like the last Apple of Eden I discussed, this apple was also involved during a crossover story expansion, but instead of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it's in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So Eivor and Cassandra during this crossover story collaborated to find an Apple of Eden hidden in the Cave of Gold, which is an ancient ezio temple on Scotland's Isle of Skye. Together they neutralized the apple's abilities, halting the spread of nightmares across the island and preventing Eivor from transforming into a mysterious creature. Afterward, Eivor passed the now powerless apple to Cassandra, who is believed to have destroyed it. So that covers all the well-known apples of Eden that have been destroyed in the series lore. I've discussed both the well-known apples and those that have met their end. There are also several other apples of Eden that haven't been prominently featured or explored in depth. For instance, the apple associated with Adam and Eve, which I mentioned at the beginning of this video, along with others referenced in various Assassin's Creed titles, or hinted at through in-game databases and notes. Beyond these, the apples I've detailed are the ones that are thoroughly recognized within the lore. If you want me to make a video going in depth on all the other different types of pieces of Eden, because let me tell you, there's an abundance of them and a lot of them are very interesting, then simply let me know down in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and with that said, I'll see you in the next one.